Good morning, guys. Thanks so much for joining me today for our webinar on media and PR for small business. My name is Kristy. I am a presenter and an advisor for Business Station as part of the Digital Solutions program. Today, the webinar is designed, to be as interactive as you'd like it to be. Please use the chat functionality or the Q&A functionality with this webinar and through Zoom if you want to ask questions at any time. My background is marketing, media and PR. So a lot of what we're going to go through today is based on my own personal experience in the media and PR space. And having sort of successfully gained a lot of media and PR for the various businesses that I've represented or owned. So hopefully you can draw on that. But like I said, do ask questions as we go. In terms of what we're going to go through today, we're going to look at the importance of PR, particularly for small businesses, and it sometimes gets overlooked for small businesses. We'll define what media and PR are and also have a look at the definition of media relations, how to build good media relationships or relationships with media, how to then generate publicity. Working with influencers is another topic that we're going to discover. And we'll look at your customer's journey as part of this, as well as your social media and PR strategy and how they sort of interlink. So quite a bit to get through in our 1 hour webinar. All right, so to get started, what is media? Well, essentially, media is a main means of mass communication. So information is delivered to the public, generally through, in a traditional sense, newspaper, magazines, televisions, radio, but then in, from an online space, a range of different ways online. So when you think of the term media, most people do think traditional media or news outlets, but it's really not the case any longer. Media is so much more, and there's an unbelievable number of media outlets that each individual consumer is going to experience on a daily basis. So there's social media, of course, there's influential bloggers, there's YouTube influencers. You've got a range of different online publications, as well as podcasts, and all of these things can be harnessed to help publicize your business. Keeping in mind that in a traditional sense, journalists and reporters are the people who write or present the news, as well as feature stories, and then editors control the content. And that, like I said, is more a traditional sense, but most of this goes online now anyway. What we do know about media these days is that editors don't necessarily control the final content, because once it does go online, everybody controls the content. And you do often see a lot of input from individuals on any media channel, particularly in the social media space. So it really is a story that's developed through the comments from the general public, as well as what's posted by the media outlet. So what you see on your screen here is what we call the peso model. Now, this is a media model strategy. Peso stands for, it's an acronym, obviously paid media, earned media, shared media, and owned media. So it's important to understand what you're doing for your small business in PR, media, and marketing, and where it fits into that model, because you really must use a variety of strategies across all different mediums. In the past, paid media was really the primary focus of advertising, and then earned media was the primary focus of PR. Shared media and owned wasn't really anyone's focus, but today there's so much crossover that each element of this model has to be a focus in your business, and you have to be doing something in each element. So just to expand on them a little bit more, paid is fairly self-explanatory. That's advertising. It could be just straight advertising. It could be advertorials, where you've got an ad alongside some editorial. It could be sponsorships, sponsored content, which is content online that you pay for. That could also be your more traditional stuff, so ads on the radio, TV, in print, so anything paid. Also paid online ads, your pay-per-click, Google AdWords, any social media advertising that you do, sponsored posts, banners, banner ads, that kind of thing. So anything that's paid. Then you've got your earned. Earned is really your news coverage. So earned media is when you've earned the opportunity, and often that comes through having good relationships with the media to appear in a news story. So media will be in a specific publication as press coverage, but it will then generally appear online, which will feature backlinks to your website. And obviously the social media aspect of that as well. And now, because of its association with being a lot more trusted, earned media has the potential to reach a lot more consumers than paid or owned media. Shared is really your social media space. And now shared media is any user-generated content or social media. So it's not created by you as such. It's created by your people or the public, and it's constantly evolving. So what happens in your shared space is largely a result of your marketing plus your customer service. And if you get both of those right, obviously there tends to be a lot of positivity in a social or a shared space. And you really can't afford any negative relations with your customers at any stage of their purchase cycle, because this is where it will come out and it will really negatively impact your shared media space. You've then got owned, which has basically your owned assets. So think of your web content or any content that you've created and you have full control over. So as I mentioned, website, your blog, you might have ebooks or white papers, you might have produced presentations. So if you fully control the content and its distribution, if you can add to it, if you can edit it, if you can delete the content, then chances are you own it. Now, each of these categories is a lot more effective when they're used in conjunction with one another than they are in isolation. So we will refer back to this peso model, but it's really important to keep it in mind. And have a look and have a think about what you're doing in each element. Are there any elements of this model that you're perhaps not doing anything in? Obviously, you need to be doing something in each element to get full reach from a media and PR sense. Okay, then we're looking at PR. So what is PR? Well, in my opinion, public relations is a strategic communication process. It is a process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between your organisation or your business and the public. But to simplify that, I think it's having a good strategy plus the ability to tell a good story. So as a small business, you might not think that you're in the business of or in the need of PR or public relations, but you absolutely are. Think back to that model. Now, this is really your earned and your shared component. So it's important that you're doing something in both of those spaces. PR is crucial to the success of every business. It doesn't matter how big or small you are. The difference is that in a small business, you tend to be a lot more budget conscious. You don't tend to have the luxury of hiring a high price PR business. So you really have to take that more of a DIY approach and master your own public relations, which is essentially what we're going to be talking about today, and developing those strategies to enable you to take control of your own PR. Now, this is a really interesting perspective to look at how the media space has evolved. So there's obviously the then, which is the old media space, and the new media space is now. But in the past, brands really controlled the messages and customers were just very much passive receptors. So publicists became a bit more like a spin doctor. They had amazing relationships with the media, which was the absolute gold. You know, your publicist had to have those media relations. They'd spin your story and consumers had no choice but to believe it. Now, customers are so much more empowered and everyone really owns the message. So you can't produce a story, or a journalist can't produce a story without everybody having a say in that and everyone taking ownership of that message. There's also a lot of simultaneous communications that are going on. So think about offline, online. Traditional media are just one outlet for customers. It's not the only outlet, obviously. So there's a lot more noise in the media space. So generating positive media coverage or publicity is a core function of someone that's involved in PR or a PR professional, but it really is just one of many functions that they will undertake, and that's why it is difficult to employ a PR company at the moment, because there should be a lot of research, a lot of strategy. There's your day-to-day messaging on social media and a lot of other activities that go into a successful public relations program. So I think it is better dealt with at the face sort of level, or at the business level, as opposed to outsourcing. Publicist was a word that sort of existed in the past because it was very much about a transaction. So a publicist would produce that specific result, like an article or some kind of coverage, whether that be newspaper, television. But in reality now, as a PR person, your job is to just continually build relationships that'll get you these positive results across all forms of media. Now, that could be relationships with the media. It could be relationships with your customers. So hopefully that makes sense. But I guess the key message here is really just that customers are more empowered than they have ever been. All right, so to get that publicity that we're talking about, you absolutely have to build media relations. This is probably the toughest part of the PR role. Building relationships with the media is so important for your business because journalists really want to deal with people that can assist them in their work or make their job easier. And today the media is so fast-paced that they really don't have the time that they probably had in the past in terms of researching stories for themselves or fact-checking stories if there is something emerging. So if you have a good relationship with the media and you can provide them with an easy story that is going to appeal to their audience, and it's going to be a win for them, and that will obviously result in a win for you. So what you need to know, a really key thing, is who the journalist or the publication that you're appealing to is speaking to. So you really have to understand the audience and what is then potentially going to appeal to them. To do that, developing a news sense is really important. So know what info each outlet normally presents, what types of items might be of interest to them based on what you sort of see in and around their media space. Really careful definition of their audience or their listeners or their readers, whoever it is that is consuming their media. You can really look at, like I said, look at the past things that they've produced, content that they've produced, articles that they've produced, to get a feel for what they like to write about or report on. You need to understand the difference between news and feature journalists. A news editor is more of a straightforward news story, like new information about something that has or will happen, whereas a feature editor will be more interested in an in-depth story that's very much topic specific. You then also have to understand the difference between trade media and consumer media. So trade media will be interested in material that's of interest to the industry that you're in, as opposed to consumer media will be speaking directly to the public. So spending that time to really consume the media that you're looking at targeting is really valuable. So really develop that news sense. Once you've done that and you've singled out or picked out some media that you'd like to get coverage in, whether that be online or offline, and you've ascertained that their audience perfectly matches your audience, you'd have to consider lead times. So lead times and deadlines for the media that you're targeting will be absolutely crucial. News items for print, radio and TV tend to have a lot shorter lead times and can appear quickly, while you've got feature articles that tend to be planned well in advance. That could be months of lead time while someone does research a story around a particular feature. So really understanding those lead times and getting that right is important. You don't want to provide a news outlet or any kind of media information that's just after, a cutoff time or anything like that. Knowing specific people is really important. Now, this can be really a difficult part of this role, getting the names of journalists, their contact details, and then developing your own database to determine how they best like to receive things like media releases or your particular updates. Once you've got that list and developed it, really make sure that you keep it up to date. So if you do have any journalists that are moving around or any of your media contacts that are representing different media outlets, you're aware of that. A question I tend to get is, how do you develop that database? Whilst you're getting a news sense, you'll start to see names associated with publications, articles, that kind of thing. So you can absolutely use that avenue. LinkedIn is a great avenue for media and finding out who's who. LinkedIn profiles will quite often have a lot of information about who a particular journalist writes for example, as well as Twitter. So most of the media or key media are on Twitter. So if it's not something that you use personally, maybe have a look at Twitter for the purposes of following individual journalists or the media to find out what sort of things they're tweeting about, and a bit more information on their activity on that platform. So knowing the specific people is really important. Being accurate when you provide them information is absolutely crucial, but providing on time, as I mentioned, is really important. We'll talk a little bit about writing a media release shortly, but if you are the contact on a media release, make sure that you're extremely responsive. So in the case that someone does try and contact you for comment, for further information, that you are answering the phone, getting back to them, again, keeping deadlines in mind, and that urgency around producing a good story and on a short time frame. I would not hesitate to invite the media to see or experience your product or service if it's appropriate. Now, you don't have to wait for a major event to do this. You might have, something that they can experience that, is just as a regular customer, but you might want to invite them to do that at, just a normal time, as opposed to an opening event or something like that. Obviously, if you are having an event, that's a great reason to invite the media along, in multiple media outlets, perhaps. But in any case, if you think the media would benefit from experiencing your product or service, don't hesitate to actually ask the question. Don't forget local media as well, and get to know your local media. I would really encourage you to make an effort to find out who they are, particularly if you're in a regional area. They tend to be quite hungry for news. That local media could be community newspapers. The staff and editors there are looking for something that's local and relevant to the specific areas that their publication covers. So if you are a small business in one of those areas and have an interesting story, it can quite often make for a very viable news story for them. So absolutely get to know local media. It's a lot easier to get coverage with local media than it is for some of the bigger outlets. And don't just think that we're talking offline or traditional here. I'm talking online as well. So in most cases, well, in all cases, a print media outlet like a newspaper will have an online presence as well, by way of website, social form, etc. But keep an eye out for online local media as well as your offline stuff. Once you've worked this database and spent the time and effort to really formulate this database, make sure that you stay in regular contact with them. You want to nurture a relationship once you've established it, but you don't want to be in contact so often that you annoy that particular contact. So I would give it the respect that it deserves from a relationship perspective. But do make sure that you are staying in as regular contact as is appropriate. Now, that might be by way of media releases and updates, or it might be by way of, every time something's happening a couple of times a year, you're touching base to say, hey, we've got this going on, would you like to come along? Or just a variety of sort of touch points, I guess, is going to help. Now, what we're talking about here is building media relations for the purpose of generating publicity, and that is just a tactic. Public relations does require more of a planned strategy and takes more time, but this is really building media relations to get that coverage, as I mentioned, and that really covers off your earned space and goes into that shared space as well. Okay, so just to extend on that earned space, publicity is all about spreading the word about your business through these non-advertising channels, so earning media. Through good media relations, you'll know who the media are. You'll know you'll be maintaining a good relationship with them, but you still need to keep in mind that they are going to want newsworthy stories. So those stories have to be appropriate time-wise. So if it's an urgent, an opening or an event or something like that, then that's often desired. If it's something that's different or unique, it's going to do well. If it has some kind of human interest element, or if there's some unique aspect about it, it's going to generally spike the interest of the media. In all cases, you'll have to have some kind of eye-catching visuals or perhaps something emotive. So it's not, words isn't enough. So you always have to consider that you're going to have to back that up with images or videos. So you're really looking for something that they can report on that perks the interest of their audience, so their readers, their viewers, their listeners. So think about that. Once you have developed that, you can then communicate that in a number of ways. Writing a media release is the most common way, and we're going to look at the structure of a media release shortly and how you can best write that. So that's the most common way to communicate with the media on something that is newsworthy. You may produce a newsletter. Now, it's quite common for businesses to produce a newsletter that goes out to their email database. But once you've done the work of developing a media database as well, look at getting that newsletter out to the media database as well. So rather than a formal media release, it could just be general snippets of information that's going on in your business. But this could spark some interest. You never know, there could be a media outlet that is writing a feature article on a particular topic, and one of the points that you've got, it's not overly newsworthy, but it fits in their topic. So producing some kind of newsletter that does go out to a media database can really help as well. Like I said, you're always going to have to have those visuals. So make sure that from a content perspective, you do have access to some kind of visuals as well. Now, you can use online news centres to distribute your stories. Perhaps you can use your social media channels to distribute stories. Make sure if you're using your own social channels that you do tag the relevant media outlets in there. You use hashtags that are relevant to the media, and you're sharing your own content as well. So you're getting that further reach. And again, another touch point with the media. You've done the work to develop this database. You're following them on socials. You've got their contact details so you can contact them directly. So it's really a combination of these touch points that is going to get you a bit of cut through. Okay, so we're going to look now at writing a media release. It is the most common way to generate publicity or to get to the media. So writing a media release is pretty common. It's essentially a document that you're going to send out to the media that details anything that could be classified as news. Journalists will take the media release, and if they find it interesting, they'll generally write an article about it. Depending on the journalist and the publication, sometimes they will just publish what they read and not contact you for comment, for fact checking or anything like that. Sometimes they will contact you. Sometimes they'll rewrite your story based on the media release that they've got, so make it their own and then publish it. So in terms of fact checking, you will have seen on social media that a lot of the time journalists are publishing first and fact checking later, or it's the general public that are correcting journalists. And it happens because the news world today is so fast paced. Any kind of media outlets would rather be first to publish something, even if it's slightly inaccurate, than waste time checking facts and be last to publish it, if that makes sense. So do keep that in mind. It's really important that you get your media release right and that it's got all of the information that is relevant, so someone can really handpick that info out and publish something that is their own. So if you've got something newsworthy and someone picks it up, the best thing about it is that the promotion that your business will get is absolutely free. Let's say it's a newspaper or a magazine publication, they're always going to have that online component as well as social media channels. So your story is going to be covered in more than just print. So you'll get the free marketing through that media outlet, or the free PR essentially through whoever publishes your release. Via their website, you'll get a link. Now that really helps from an SEO perspective, so that's great for the online space, but it obviously is likely to be clicked and then will result in increased traffic to your site as well. So it's a really good way to build your brand. It's also a great way to gain credibility within the industry that you're in, amongst industry peers as well as consumers. So SEO is, I think SEO is a really interesting factor as well, so don't forget that. Now, keep in mind, it is very competitive, so you have to make sure that your media release is the one that grabs the attention of the journalists. So I think the best media releases are written in this inverted sort of pyramid format that you see on your screen. What's not in that pyramid is your subject line or your heading. So they are one and the same. Your heading is absolutely crucial, because you might find that a journalist or a media outlet doesn't even get to the lead if the subject line's not catchy enough or the heading's not catchy enough. Now, I use the term subject line and heading because it is very common. We'll talk about distribution shortly, but it is very common to distribute media releases by email. And your subject line and your heading should always be the same thing. People aren't going to have a look at a media release based on a boring sort of subject line. So it has to be the same, and they have to be catchy. So normally about 5 words for a heading, something that's really going to get the journalist going, I need to know more about this. Then you've got the lead. The lead is really the most newsworthy information, the who, what, where, when, why. And this is, again, a hook to further draw the reader in. Then you've got the body. Now, this is important details, your main argument. You might have some evidence backing that up, or quotes from relevant people in there. Now, in terms of quotes are a really key part of a media release. It establishes credibility, and it is a form of evidence to back up what you're saying. Now, who you get to quote, it will depend on the story and on your industry and your business, but always look for someone that's authoritative to the situation. So all media releases are written in third person. You never write them in first person. So even if, let's say, you're the CEO of your business, but you're writing the media release as well, small business, you're doing a bit of everything, you could use yourself as the quote, the person being quoted, CEO of business XYZ says, da-da-da-da-da, whatever that might be. Because it is written in third person, that's okay. So it's still someone authoritative to that story. Or you might contact someone within the industry that you work in, so the head of an industry body, whoever it is that can add credibility or add authority to the story. Don't quote anybody, particularly in print, without them agreeing to be quoted first. That's really important. But a quote is a very crucial element of a media release. You've then got the tail. Now, this is extra information that might be needed. It could be a bit of background on the business or any other extra sort of ancillary details that a journalist might need to know. So that sort of ends it. Obviously, after this, you'll see the word ends, which is pretty straightforward. But after that, you'll generally see a media contact. For further comment, please contact whoever that key media contact is. Just make sure that person is aware that they're the contact, and that, like I said right at the beginning, they're very responsive and answering their phone. So should the media contact them, they're straight onto it. So that's it. It's really, I find that most small businesses struggle with writing a media release because we try to pitch our products in a sales sense, but you have to write it as more of a factual statement. So take the hype out of it, take the exaggeration out of it and the emotion out of it, and write it quite factually in third person with a key argument and evidence and quotes to back that up. So it is a pretty straightforward document. You might find that you'll do a number of revisions to get that right. And you can keep going back and forth and sort of refining that until you do get it as a media release, as opposed to you selling your product or service. So let's say you've got something interesting to say. You've written your media release. Now you've got to get it out. To get good reach with your media release, you have to have that database of media that I was speaking about earlier. So you have to have the right contacts to get the exposure that you're chasing. So that side of things does take time. As a starting point, if you are still working on this, or you are taking time to get to know media, I would look at a bare minimum, distributing your media release to local newspapers. Like I said, the local guys, whether it's newspapers, broadcasters, so TV and radio, if that's relevant to you, tend to be hungry for news, particularly if it's related to small local business. So it tends to be a bit of a win for their audience demographics as well. I'd also look at industry-specific publications if you work, depending on the industry that you're in, but a lot of the time, the industry that you work in may have their own sort of newsletters, publications, magazines, whatever that might be. If you can get coverage in that, that then further establishes your credibility in the industry that you're in. But they could also have some really good media contacts that pick up on their information that they put out. If you're a member of your local Chamber of Commerce, consider sending it to them. Generally speaking, they will produce a newsletter, so they may look to give you coverage, or look at any other relevant membership organisations that you're a part of. So this could be regional, it could be state, or it could be national organisations. So I would absolutely consider those contacts as well. You can then get greater distribution through media agencies, like there's the AAP, and a couple of other industry-specific distribution media agencies. There's obviously a cost associated with that. So as a small business, you need to weigh that up if you think that's worthwhile. There's no guarantee that you're going to get coverage by paying that distribution fee either. That's just really to get your media release out to a good database. So keep that in mind. You need to make sure that the release is addressed to the appropriate person at whoever the media outlet is. Otherwise, they might not receive it. So this is where it comes down to really working on that database. If you're not sure, mark it to the attention of the person's title. So it could be food editor or whatever that might be. Now, email distribution of media releases is very widely accepted, so I think that's perfectly fine. But where possible, paste your release into the body of an email rather than adding it as an attachment. It just is one less step for whoever's reading it to have to do. But in terms of, when you're developing your database, you might establish that they like to receive media releases a different way. So perhaps they're uploaded to a portal, or, there could be some other way, but it is most likely going to be via email. But it's good to check. And also check that they've received it. So if it's an outlet that's particularly important to you, you might want to follow it up with a phone call and just make sure that they got your release. I would always send it with some images, high res if possible, not too big in terms of a file size that you're going to block up their email server, but maybe perhaps a link to a high res version, or even a note to say, this is medium res, please contact us for high res. Depending on the outlet, it might be online and therefore a smaller file is fine. If it's print, they may need a higher res image. Other organisations might also be able to assist in publicity if they receive your releases, like I mentioned, those industry organisations. So you might, rather than just sending the media release to them, you might want to engage with them and say, do you have a media database that you can send this release out to? So consider that as well. Now, if you are going to send by email, don't send your media release to a long list of journalists that appear on each other's recipients' mail list. Make sure you use that blind carbon copy or the BCC functionality. But also keep in mind, you might have to tailor your media release for each audience. So it could be one story, but what's going to be relevant for your local newspaper, for example, might not be relevant for a trade publication. So you might need to do some tweaks. You may find that you have 2 or 3 versions of the same media release. But final tip in terms of distribution, which I did touch on, but I'll stress again because it's so important, use the subject line and make that the headline of the story. Don't make it, and I see this all the time, I get media releases where it says, the subject line says company XYZ media release. So it's not really, a hook to actually open the email. So I would always consider using that prime real estate space from an email sense as the headline of the story and keeping it at about 5 words. All right, so that's writing media releases, but going back to this peso model, publicity is what we've been talking about when it comes to media releases and coverage in publications. So that's really just about that earned media. Whereas, as I said right at the beginning, public relations is about all media. And PR literally fits within each element of this peso model, and it has to be incorporated in your entire marketing strategy. As I also mentioned, that earned media really crosses over into the shared space because there is that social aspect of any earned media as well. So keep that in mind. But now we're going to talk about influencers, and they really sit in both the shared and the paid space. So you may or may not have had some experience already in working with influencers. The term social influencer isn't really anything new. They've been around in various forms for forever. If you think back, to the good old days where a company would have an event and they'd invite some key high-profile people because of the credibility that would sort of give to the event. So they really have been around in varying forms. But the term influencers really does refer to people who possess some kind of significant credibility or have considerable reach within a target audience. And in sort of today's terms, that really largely revolves around the internet. Now, influencer marketing is very popular and it can be a really effective form of marketing, and it also can be very low cost and a great way to generate positive PR. Influencers tend to have a power to affect purchasing decisions of others, and that tends to be because of their authority. It could be their knowledge, their position, or their relationship with their audience, or they're following in like a distinct niche, I guess, that they actively engage with. Now, the size of the following will depend on the size of the topic or the niche. But these topic experts, I should say, or influencers, could be thought leaders, they could be brand advocates, they could be bloggers, YouTubers, podcasters, social media influencers. You do find that it's even celebrities or other key sort of opinion leaders like journalists or academics, or industry experts, essentially. So they are people that have this above average influence on their specific audience. So in my opinion, social media has sort of devalued this form of PR because there has been an emerging number of fakes or wannabe influencers that tell you they have a huge number of followers, they want something for free, a product or service to post to their followers, and there's a miscommunication in deliverables and that kind of thing. So it can be a bit off-putting to some small businesses. And there are some horror stories that you do hear out there. But I think if you do the hard work, your side, and do your research and you get it right, it can be such a great form of PR. Okay, so true influencer marketing, in my opinion, should be directed by you. So it should be you that approaches them because you've done such thorough research to determine that this person is perfect to create publicity for your organization. Sometimes it happens the other way, but again, in any case, you do have to do your research. So it basically involves leveraging the influencers, obviously the content that they will post, but leveraging that in your own content as well. So in your own content marketing, I should say. So using your website, your socials, popping their information on your blogs, as well as them doing that on their side of things as well. It does result in increased traffic to your website, leads, customers in some cases. So it is really valuable in that sense. And the reason it works is because we trust friends, colleagues, experts a lot more than you trust advertising. So the people that follow these influencers, depending on the topic and the niche and the audience, will have a lot of trust for them. So they tend to believe what they're being told. If you appreciate the fact that they've worked really hard on their audience and you can see that they've devoted time and resources to create these authentic relationships with their audience or the people that matter, and it's the same sort of audience that you would have for your business, so represents the same target market as the people that would be purchasing from your business, then it can be a perfect match. So choosing the right influencer is the absolute key element here. The audience has to match yours. So there is a bit of a criteria to determine if it's going to work for both your company and for the influencer. First of all, you have to know the value to the influencer. So what's in it for them? They're not going to work for free normally, or if at all. So it could be that they want to be paid. It could be that they want free products or services or to experience something for free, or it could be a combination of payment and something for free. So you have to make sure that that meets your budget as well. The audience demographics is absolutely crucial. They have to match your specific target market. You could have someone come to you and they have hundreds of thousands of followers, but look at who those people are. Do they represent the type of person or the core demographic of people that are going to purchase your product or service? If they're not, it doesn't matter if they have 10 million followers. It's going to fall on deaf ears if it's not the right audience. So they have to match your specific target market. Reach is important. So I did touch on the size of their audience, but size alone isn't enough. The audience demographics have to match, of course, but you do have to know that there's enough of their audience to actually make a difference. The second, or the next element I would look at is engagement of their audience. So you have to know that their audience is truly engaged with their posts. So look at their past posts, have a look at what kind of likes, comments, and shares that they're getting on each post, and look out for true conversation and engagement on them. It will become pretty obvious if they've bought an audience or if it's, not an engaged audience, because you'll see things like, perhaps a big audience and no likes, comments, and shares on a post. A big audience, lots of likes on a post, but no conversation, so no comments back and forth. Sometimes you also see a big audience, lots of comments from the audience, but no talking back from the influencer, which is really, you would imagine that their audience won't stay around for long. There's only so much you can talk to someone without them talking back before you go, I'm not going to bother anymore. So you're looking for that true engagement where they're reaching out to the influencer, and the influencer is actually responding, answering questions, that kind of thing. So that true and genuine conversation. I'd also look at the quality of their writing style, their photography, making sure that matches how you would talk to your target market as well. And the last thing I look out for is if they have any connection to other influencers. So are they respected or known in the industry? So do a bit of Googling, do your own research on them as well. So that's kind of a bit of a key criteria that I have sort of determined. You might have other key criteria that's really important to you. So really just determine or, decide what that criteria is. But it is a great and absolutely fabulous form of PR if you can use it right. All right, so how else can you generate good PR? Well, from your customers. But to get good PR from your customers and to get valuable PR, you have to engage with them. Now, there is a stat that is that 88% of people are influenced by reviews and online comments, so shared media or what they see in that shared space. So it's really important that you know what people are saying about you online and that you're part of that conversation. Again, if you've got people that are reaching out to you, trying to engage with you, you really don't want to just leave them and their comments sort of hanging. You want to be responding to them. Social pressure can tarnish your brand as quickly as you grow it. You have to keep in mind that fingertips are always on the move. So what happens offline will very quickly go online. So you've got to make sure that you're there to be part of the conversation. Now, whether someone's waiting in line and getting frustrated about the wait time, or they're disgruntled about some service that they're receiving, whatever that might be, they can very quickly and easily go onto social media and report on that, essentially. So because no business is perfect, virtually everyone in any industry will have to deal with some online reviews or even customer complaints in person at some point. So like I said, it could be something simple, like, wait times, you could get an order wrong, those kind of things. Or it could be a more serious complaint, but how you handle that complaint makes all the difference. So small businesses do have, generally a handful of reasons that they don't handle complaints very well. It could be that you're too busy. Small businesses, I find, get a bit defensive. So they try a bit too quickly to come up with a solution for a problem, or are defensive about the product or service that they've provided. If you've got staff that work within your business, sometimes they can be intimidated by a lack of training. So make sure that your staff are trained on complaint handling, know their empowerment as to when they can actually escalate problems to that next level. And make sure that you've got strong procedures in place for handling complaints. Now, if you aren't handling complaints well, it can have a really serious impact on your shared media space and result in some serious negative PR. We see examples of this all the time where it's really straightforward issues, but people get online and they don't hold back, and then other people can quickly sort of join that conversation as well. So you really want to make sure that you are addressing that at the face value so that it doesn't get online. The more positivity that you can draw out from your customers and get that side of things online, the better. And you can really do that by just nipping complaints in the bud there and then while the people are still with you. But on the positive side of things, how can you bring positive PR from your customers? Well, you really have to engage with them on social media. So first of all, you have to, or not first of all, but one of the elements you have to consider is that you have to listen to what's being said online. So you have to listen to online reviews, whether that's a Google review, a Facebook review. There could be an industry specific like your TripAdvisor, Yelp, those kind of platforms. I would be looking for, tracking any mentions of your business, as well as tracking alerts through, mentions online through Google Alerts. That kind of monitoring will tell you what's being said. And so listen to what's actually being said online. You can talk back to people, and this is a really core part of actually developing that relationship online. You can talk to them on social media and engage with them on social media. You can engage with influencers on social media. You might have your own blogs and video communities or social networking sites that you actually participate in. Talk with pictures on your social media channels, obviously talking with your media releases as well, but talk to customers when they're physically with you. Get them to go online, talk to them about, you might see them taking a photo of something, your product or service in use. So tell them how they can tag you in that, what hashtags they can use, so that you can then continue that conversation online. And that sort of comes into the supporting side of things. So direct people to these channels that they can talk. So provide links to your social media in person, on your email signatures, on your website. So really encourage that social space. So you've got somewhere that you can listen for any feedback, and you've got a platform that you can talk back to people. So I would really encourage you to advertise your social media channels far and wide, and really tell people how and where they can leave feedback. So make it easy for them to find, and then obviously listen to what's being said and talk back to them. However, no matter how well you do from a customer service, complaint handling perspective, and all of the business side of things, a crisis may strike. So this can happen even if you've done everything absolutely right. I would recommend that you are as prepared as possible for any kind of crisis. And the best way that you can be prepared is to have a plan before a crisis strikes. So in that plan, you'll identify a spokesperson. You'll make sure that that person is providing information quickly, and the information that they're providing is honest, open and transparent, because if it's not, it does tend to come out in that social media space, because there's always someone that knows part of the story or has seen something, talk to someone. As part of that plan, you have to have a strategy around keeping your employees and your stakeholders informed. And then secondary to that, your customers and your suppliers, how you're going to inform them. Making sure as part of this plan that you are updating very early and often. Now that could be by way of statements to the media, depending on the size and scope of the crisis. It could be on your social media channels, on your website, or any other areas where you can communicate. So depending on what's appropriate. Now, I've been involved in a couple of businesses where there's been crisis situations, and having this plan has really ensured that the business has been able to get through a crisis with the minimal amount of damage. Now, sometimes a crisis is as a result of a bad customer service experience that kind of snowballs and goes viral very quickly. Sometimes it's something beyond your control. So the most recent example that I can sort of think of is, and we're not seeing it as much anymore, but when we were sort of in a state of lockdown or not getting many COVID cases, where there were COVID outbreaks, and the businesses that were negatively impacted by that. I saw on the news the other night that there was a physical attack at an establishment in a particular location, and obviously their names all over all over the news, and it's not something that's within their control. They certainly didn't cause it as a business, but they really have to have this crisis plan so that they can get through that and minimize any damage that's caused. Sometimes you have bigger crises or different types of crises within the business, but having this plan that clearly identifies some of those core elements that I've mentioned will just make sure that you get through it as quickly and easily with minimal damage as possible. And so I very much encourage you to have a crisis plan well before any crisis strikes. All right, so we've just about come to the end of the webinar, and I really do hope that it's given you a greater understanding of PR, the paid, the earned, the shared, and the owned elements, and that you will be a little bit more confident to be able to build your brand across these areas. My top tips to build your brand are, first of all, always factor in that peso model and don't leave out any component of it. So from today, have a look at the peso model and make note of what you're actually doing in each of those elements, and make sure that you are doing something in each. Media releases are very important. Look at trying to craft compelling stories on new and interesting things that happen within your business. I'd aim for a target of at least, say, a few per year and see how you go. Now, they could be different for different media outlets. You could have something at a local level, something at a product sort of release level. Just really aim for a few items that you can get out throughout the year. I'd highly encourage you to promote your story or your expertise. Also that of others within your business. As small businesses, we quite often have a really interesting backstory. So you can promote that in your owned, your earned, and your shared media space, but really make it personal and tell your story or the story behind your brand. For cheap and effective PR, look at sponsoring or participating in any kind of charitable or community events that are relevant to your industry or relevant to your particular business. The key thing that you're looking out for here is that the audience perfectly matches your target market. So you need to know exactly who it is that represents your ideal customer or your core target market. Once you've found a sponsorship opportunity where the audience at that particular event or the audience to that organization is perfectly matched to yours, then that represents a really good opportunity to communicate to people that are likely to buy your product or service. Definitely reach out to influencers in your industry, do your research and understand who they are, and make a plan, a strategic plan to actually approach them. Also, I did touch on Google Alerts earlier, but definitely use Google Alerts to track what's being said about you online. So you can set those up in your Google account. You choose keywords that Google then reports on. Once they're set up, you'll get a notification via email anytime those keywords appear online. So make the keywords specific enough that you're not getting tons of alerts. I would normally encourage you to follow your business name, for example, so that you're aware of any time your business is actually mentioned online, because people don't always tag your business in it or let you know that they're mentioning you. Also look at competitors perhaps, or any other industry or topic specific keywords that you think will be relevant and help you in your PR quest. All right, well, that is it from me from Media and PR, for small business. If you have any questions at all, please shoot them through by the chat or the Q&A functionality, and I'll stay online now to answer them. But do keep in mind we have just scratched the surface. So if you're wanting to know more, you can book a one-on-one appointment with me or any of our range of advisors. We've got more than 25 advisors across WA, Queensland and NT that can help you as part of this Commonwealth Government funded digital solutions program. So the program, you can get 7 hours with the 3 of those being one-on-one with an advisor for just $44. So it's really affordable for small businesses. And like I said, it's Commonwealth government funded. There is a little bit of eligibility around that. You have to have an ABN in WA, Queensland or NT, because that's the area that we cover. You have to be a business that's operating for profit and employ fewer than 20 staff. So if you meet that eligibility, absolutely consider it. It's a great thing to do for a small business. But thanks again for joining me. Like I said, I'll stay online now and answer questions. So if you do have any, shoot them through. But otherwise, good luck with your media and PR.